Okay, gang, I know it's late in the week. It's September 7th, and your first posts are due this evening. So I apologize for getting this out late, number one. However, I must say that the information for this week is too important not to get. So if you're spending very little time this week just skimming over stuff, hey, it's like week 1 and 2, the introduction, and you have that Bill Murray clip, you know, it's no big deal. I want you to dig in a little bit more this week, because at least there are a couple of things that are going to be very important for us moving forward the rest of the semester. So I want to go through the PowerPoint pretty quickly, not in too much depth, and I don't want to take too much of your time. I do have a couple of YouTube clips to help you understand the spotlight effect, you know, what we think about when we enter a room full of people. You know, if you've ever had like a stain on your shirt and you're like, oh man, everybody can see that stain. That's so bad. Man, I have to go home and change, and you're self-conscious about it all day. Well, the odds are that people likely aren't even going to notice it. That we're all so kind of wrapped up in our own like existence and what's going on with us. We're very busy. People are very busy. That actually, even if we have a big stain or something going wrong with us that day, or our hair is out of place, it's really probably not that big a deal. Say we have like a big pimple or something, it's really probably not that big a deal. It's probably we're paying more attention to it than other folks are. So I think that's important for us, for our own self-confidence when we interact socially with other people, that, hey, you know what? If something's going that's not quite right, we don't feel like we look just right, just try to ignore it. Go on with your day. You know what? If somebody else doesn't like it, that's their own problem. So try to help you out there a little bit with your own self-confidence. Secondly, there's this illusion of transparency, that if you're in front of a room full of people, that they can see right through you. And oh my gosh, they know I'm petrified, and they know I'm so nervous to give this speech and to talk in front of people. People really can't detect your emotions that well. So as evidenced by some of these experiments that they've done to test this illusion of transparency and the spotlight effect. Remember those things. Those are going to be on exams. Those things are things that will help you, especially knowing about the illusion of transparency. People perform better when they know, you know what? People really can't detect how nervous that I am. They actually, by knowing that, it helps you perform better. Hopefully both of those things will. So I've tried to include a little stuff about neuroscience and really kind of how we're set up to be social. We are set up for social interaction from our most, the most, like, how would I say this, our beginnings. From the first time we come out of the womb and we're here in this world, we have these things called mirror neurons, and we're now able to measure them and see them in an MRI, that, hey, there's these neurons that light up in areas that control the face of babies when their mothers smile at them. The areas that control the face where they cause that baby to smile light up when the mom smiles at them or when somebody else. We have these things called mirror neurons. So it's like what we have is infectious to others, the emotions that we have. It really goes a long way to describe vicarious learning, which is a social learning aspect theory put forth by Albert Bandura. Sorry for that. Anyway, mirror neurons are important. Let's see here. What else do we have? When we look at somebody and we perceive something in them, the same areas of our brain light up. We are wired for empathy. We are wired to try to understand each other. It happens biologically. So I want us to kind of, go through, take a couple minutes to go through some of these YouTube clips. This explains the part of the brain that is responsible. One of the highest points that make us the most adaptable, and you would somewhat argue the most intelligent species on the planet, the last part of our brains to develop is actually the prefrontal cortex. The medial prefrontal cortex is a pathway of neurons located in the cleft between your brain hemispheres, just behind your eyes. And it becomes more active when you think about yourself. So if you think about that, that's one of the last parts of our brain to fully develop. We don't truly, what that tells me is that we don't truly know ourselves until we're in our mid to late 20s, even into our 30s. A lot of times people don't really discover completely who they are. If you're doing things like that are impairing your brain development, like drinking a lot or using a lot of drugs, whatever it might be, that's actually impairing your ability to discover fully who you are. So if you're kind of in this, okay, who I am, I think I know who I am, that's really not settled, and I would argue throughout your life, but neurologically, medically, a medical understanding, the brain doesn't stop developing until you're about 25 or 30, and it's this last part that helps us understand ourselves the most. So just FYI, interesting stuff. So, think about this. Who are you? Come up with, fill in the blanks. Come up with 5 things. Who are you? List those things. Try to make them the most important things about it. Each one of us, and I went over this last week, each one of us are comprised of our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. That's really a cognitive triad, a cognitive triangle way of understanding things. What this does is it leaves out what I think is the most important part of us, which, if I had control over this, you could actually write on the screen. Includes beliefs. So if you could fill in the middle of this triangle with beliefs, because beliefs are going to interact with and determine your thoughts, your feelings, and behaviors. So consider this. How do these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors interact? You think I'm a good student, which leads to confidence, which leads to, studying and reading. And so it basically perpetuates itself. It's kind of what I talked about last week, only simpler. I didn't put it in a figure 8, in an infinity symbol. But I think the infinity symbol is a better model. But I'm trying to simplify it a little bit. So who am I? Our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors. Consider if you thought you were a bad student. What are your feelings going to be like if you consider yourself a bad student? Maybe a little insecure, maybe feeling a little inferior, which I don't really want to go to class because I might not fit in, or I might say something wrong, I might look dumb, so I'm going to skip class and play video games. So then that perpetuates. If you skip class and you miss class and you're not getting the information, then you see how this perpetuates itself. So thoughts really kind of determine these things, but it actually goes back and forth. One determines the other. And I think this model leaves out our beliefs, which is our underlying, the things that happen here. That's what I don't like about the cognitive models, or the CBT models. It leaves out beliefs. So keep that in mind. I want you to remember that. So overall, and this kind of goes into something called self-fulfilling prophecies. I don't want to fill, I just want to write. So anyway, if we talk about self-fulfilling prophecies, think about how that our perceptions of ourself can determine that. Like if we have a bad thought, if we have an irrational thought, and it's making our lives worse, cognitive therapy is built on replacing that thought. You can also misinterpret feelings. We have a thing called impact bias. So, for instance, I remember a time in my life where I was in a really committed relationship, and that relationship ended. And I had all these thoughts like, this is the end of my life, this is the end of the world, nothing will ever get... I've been in this relationship for a while. I've been in this relationship for like 4 years. So it was a bad deal, it was a bad breakup. But really, honestly, was it the end of the world for me? I was like 20. I was 21. No? I'm still here. I'm 44. Did it feel really bad at the time? Absolutely. Did I think it was? Yes. But there was an impact bias. This is always going to be bad. This is always going to suck from here on out. My life is never going to get better. It was wrong. My feeling was misinterpreted. Here's an important, I wish I'd write this down. Feelings are always temporary. Think about that. Feelings are always temporary. We have an impact bias. I'm not going to go over immune neglect. We're going to go forward with this a little bit further, if I can. Come on, let's go. There we go. Okay, really important concept here. Mark it with a star. How our thoughts. Now remember, I was looking at feelings because we can misinterpret feelings, how we feel, and how feelings affect us, which can lead to faulty behaviors. Now we're going to talk about how thoughts can be misinterpreted. Sometimes we don't know ourselves. Remember, and it's not just 25 or 30-year-olds or 20-year-olds that don't always know themselves. Sometimes it's people that throughout their lives, this is kind of a human tendency. We have a self-serving bias. What that means is we have a tendency, I'm not saying we always do, but for the most part, people have a tendency to perceive yourself favorably. Across countries, average esteem was above the midpoint in every study. So if you take 100% of the population, really you have an average of where an esteem should be. Average esteem was above the midpoint in every country. In U.S. college students, the most common score was perfect esteem. I am perfect. So that's, I don't know whether you'd say that's narcissistic or what that was, and I don't want to pick on college students too much because you guys do have it difficult, and don't take me the wrong way there. That's coming from our text. But all of us have this, and I'm not saying it's college students only, I'm saying all of us have this self-serving bias. And we also have self-serving attributions. We tend to attribute positive outcomes to things that we did, and negative outcomes to things that happen outside of us. For example, when profits are up, CEOs tend to welcome big bonuses for themselves. Yeah, I deserve to be rolling in cash. All these millions of dollars I got, my shareholders, a bunch of money, everything's great. But when profits are down, it's just dang economy. It's the taxes are too high. It's because they're doing this, because they're doing that. It's everybody else's fault. Not really in reality. We do have these self-serving attributions. And so I'm not going to go over, I might go over these later, these 3 domains of attribution, but I'm not going to go over them now for the sake of time. This is the big one. I wish they would have put this in this chapter, but they did, so I have to go over it now. Okay? I really want us to focus more on the individual in these early chapters. But this one threw in, with the self-serving bias, a group-serving bias. And this is where things get interesting. Okay, so now this is where the course takes a turn. Group-serving bias. Thought misinterpretations, group to group. Okay? Group-serving bias, explaining away out-group members' positive behaviors. In other words, you could see somebody that in a group that's different than yours do something great. So let's say for instance that if you're an OU fan, let's say that or an Oklahoma Sooners football fan, let's say that Texas would have won the game against, who did they play, Maryland? Let's say that they won their game against Maryland. Oh, they got lucky. It wasn't their skills, wasn't anything that they had to do because they might be better athletes or this and that. But I know they got beat. But let's say they won. And we say they just got lucky. Versus if our team wins, maybe by a little bit, because we were the better team. You explain away positive behaviors from outgroups and attributing negative behaviors to their dispositions while excusing such behavior by one's own group. Let me jump into this a little bit deeper. Volleyball players who won their game attributed the success to their team. Those who lost blamed other factors. You're like, well, that kind of keeps me going as an athlete. It's like, I don't want to look at this from, that it could be my fault. That keeps my confidence up. Some of this is just self-serving. It's to keep us from getting too down. It's kind of like to keep us from getting depressed. But there's ways that this can get really, it's like a tribal kind of thought process. It can get destructive. Let's keep going. 53% of Dutch rate their marriage is better than that of most others. Well, so over half people say, yeah, mine's better than others, but only 1% rate theirs worse. I'm thinking the rest of them say they're on par with us. I don't know. How do you come with that statistic? These are from your text. 66% of Americans give their child's public school a rating of A or B. The school that my child goes to is great, while 64% rated the nation's public schools as a C or D. The rest of those schools out there suck. Well, that doesn't make sense. If 66% of the schools, the respondents say A or B, well, something's not adding up there, because you would think, well, obviously the other 36% should be C or D, or 34%. Most sorority members perceive those in their own sorority as less likely to be snobbish and conceited than in other sororities. They're snobs, but we're not. Other examples, there was a bad deal at OU fraternity a few years ago, and they were, I think they just banned that thing, rightfully so. But it was interesting to hear arguments back and forth. We're going to come back to group serving bias because it explains a lot of what happens in our society, particularly among groups on Facebook, politically, you name it. It explains a lot of group interaction and group conflict. Because you can see where somebody doesn't have the right information. If you think, if you're one of the 2/3 of Americans that give your school an A or B, while you think that 2/3 of the nation's schools are C or D, somewhere that the numbers aren't adding up. It comes from bias, a lack of objectivity. Your behaviors can also cause misrepresentations. Self-preservation, we all express ourselves in behaving in ways designed to create a favorable impression or impression that it corresponds to one's ideals. So everybody kind of tries to present themselves a little bit favorably. People that don't tend to have really low self-esteem or are depressed, but for the most part, people try to present pretty favorably. Self-monitoring, we're attuned to the way we present in social situations and adjust our performance to create the desired impression. So a lot of people, remember we started our slides today with like that, with the illusion of transparency, and people can see what I'm doing, and so let's say we're giving our speech and somebody in the crowd yawns or looks away or is looking at their phone. We're likely, because we're already nervous, to get a bad appraisal of that situation. Oh my gosh, I'm bombing. Everybody can see how nervous I am, and then crater in our response. Where what we should be doing is focus on the people that are looking at us and grab their attention more. There's something called false self-behavior. It's a researcher called Susan Harder. When I took this class as an undergraduate, I actually as I was a graduate student, I did a special report on false self-behavior. Fascinating. In middle adolescence, we have this thing called false self-behavior where we go through and we act out these different things. And then based on the feedback we get from our peers and internally, we either will accept that behavior as a part of ourselves. Yeah, that kind of reflects who I am. Or we'll say, you know what, I didn't feel good about that. That wasn't right. I'm not going to do that again. So, you've heard about this thing about kids going through phases. It's actually kind of true. Every young kid, 13 to 15 especially, kind of has this really in-depth identity search where they just are impulsive and they start acting out, behaviorally a little bit, and these are things called false self-behavior. Susan Harder writes a lot about those. We kind of remember I talked a lot about identity, who we are, as individuals. Typically, we go through some stages. Here, when we're first born, we really kind of have a symbiotic relationship with our mother. Think about the first year where, really just kind of connected to our caregivers. Just carried around, can't move ourselves, can't really think ourselves. Really kind of almost at one with our mother, our caregivers, father, whoever it might be. James Marcia has an identity development. It views us as, after this symbiotic stage, going into kind of diffusion. One does not have a sense of making choices, of having choices, or has not made a choice. So it's like, we're young, we're 12 years old, we're not really making our choices, our caregivers are making those choices for us. Then we kind of go into this foreclosure, commitment to roles, values, goals without questioning, conforming. Usually around 16 to 18, we maybe have this foreclosure. This is who I'm going to be, kind of think we know. And then a lot of times people go into a moratorium. And some people may just always go into this foreclosure and never come out of it. Some people go into a moratorium where they have kind of an identity crisis. Who am I? I've got all this new information. What do I do with it? They start exploring choices and commitments and not completely adopted. In other words, I'm still kind of looking through who I am. A lot of times that can happen throughout your 20s, maybe even into the 30s a little bit. And what Marcia says is a person should go through all these stages. You may think moratorium is kind of a bad deal because it sounds kind of bad to not know who you are. Marcia says that you should go through these things. And then there's an achievement. Completed working through identity crisis, committed to role value that you yourself chose. So anyway, that kind of gives you an idea. You can go into more if you want to study Marcia. Okay, so I'm going to have another idea here from going from the individual, kind of looked at group a little bit. Now I'm going to look at the bigger picture, systematic, system-wide. Our culture here, we really stress individualism, rugged individualism. You are what you make of yourself. Pull yourself by your bootstraps. You can do anything you want. The concept of giving priority to one's own goals over group goals and defining one's identity in terms of personal attributes rather than group identifications. We really do that strongly here in the United States. In other words, to thine own self be true. Identity is defined by individual traits and goals. So if you went through those 5 identity things earlier, a lot of times those are very individualized. Now, if you have children, if you're a parent, many times that will be part of your identity. It means it's not all about you. Independent self, construing one's own identity as an autonomous self. As a whole, the United States really strongly favors an idea of individual identity. Now, in other cultures, so I'm talking about system-wide, big cultures. Now, think self, group, now system, that the groups and the individuals are in. There are other systems that are collectivist. In other words, they give priority to the goals of one's group, often one's extended family or work group, and define one's identity accordingly. In other words, in this culture, someone says the mindset might be no one is an island. In other words, we're all interconnected. What I do affects them, affects them, affects them. What they do affects me. And so it's not just me, it's us. Identity is defined by connections with others, by the relationships. And there you may have an interdependent self, construing one's identity in relation to others. So there's other ways of thinking about the world other than just saying it's me, and a whole bunch of individuals. In other words, other folks around the world, especially in let's say Native American cultures, really more of a collectivist kind of ideology. Some Eastern cultures, more of a collectivist understanding of people all relating to each other. So, yeah, let's see. Let's stop it there. Let's stop there. So, I went on for longer than I intended. So the main things to think about are the slides that I went through that have to do with the individual. We're still thinking about the individual, how the individual relates. The bigger concept is that group serving bias. That's going to help us explain conflict later on. So I hope this has been helpful. I look forward to reading your posts. Take care.